Welcome everyone. Last session of the last day of Domains 101. Um,
Yeah.
we're excited to be here. We're talking about beyond domains, no lampshade. So we're going to talk about things that you can't or that you may think don't aren't compatible with domains, and how does that fit? How do those applications or anything like that? How does that fit into domains? Talk about different use cases and all that stuff. But before we even get into what you can't do or what you might not have thought you can do or what you might not have thought about, we kind of have to define the boundaries we've set ourselves here in. So domain of one's own and shared hosting at Reclaim, and frankly, most companies that offer shared web hosting services are using what's like industry-wide known as the LAMP stack. And LAMP is an acronym that stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Perl.
And sometimes Python.
Sometimes Python, but kind of rarely Python. But
You're right.
it feels like anyway. So I just kind of,
Damn it, you're right, Taylor.
just kind of mentioning here, and I pulled this up. I just Googled like LAMP stack, and I found this IBM page. So we're in the realm of international business machines, so we're correct probably. So they define LAMP as Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. Like I said, usually Perl as well, almost always, but Perl is like Perl doesn't get as much love, so sometimes people forget it in the acronym. But what does that mean? Okay, Linux is the operating system that the server is running. So it needs to be an application that can run on Linux. We're talking about what you can run in a LAMP stack. So what can you run on shared hosting or domain of one's own needs to be Linux compatible. Apache is the web server. Apache is like a prolific piece of software at this point in terms of what it can do, what it enables for the web. It's very much tied into open source in terms of establishing like licensing. It's it's kind of wild. We use it, and shared hosting uses it because it's really really efficient and good at allowing a lot of people to do a lot of different things all on one server, which allows you to do things in an economical way from in terms of resources. So Apache can handle all kinds of different web pages, all kinds of different applications, but there are some limitations. Applications you run need to be written with Apache in mind, at least, or be compatible with, and some applications aren't that way. MySQL is the database, so it's just one type of database. There's all kinds of other databases. MySQL is probably one of the most popular databases in the world in terms of how many instances it's running. But there, again, are some features that it may or may not provide or implement differently than things like Postgres or, I don't know, like heaven forbid, like Oracle SQL or something, something proprietary. So your application that you're running also needs to be compatible with MySQL. And then finally, PHP is the programming language that if your application is written with a programming language, maybe you're just doing static HTML or something, then you're not concerned about it. But if you're running a CMS, WordPress, you probably need some programming language available to you. PHP and Perl are typically the choices for a lot of reasons that are somewhat historical, somewhat based on performance and managing multiple things running. But basically, this is the structure that you have available to you if you want to run an application. So what that results in is a lot of applications available to you, but not every single possible web application. So what we're wanting to talk about is like, what if the application you want to run doesn't work with, say, Apache or PHP or MySQL or something like that? We aren't going to talk about things that don't work with Linux, just because I don't, Jim, I don't know if you do, but I don't have any experience with like Windows Server stuff. That's a whole other world. But there are some services that you may want to run maybe on a different cloud or something that run on not on Linux. But even outside of this, there are still a lot of kind of cool and creative things you can do with domain of one's own, or shared hosting. Before we even get into some of the more advanced stuff, the first thing I want to mention is that there's a lot of stuff you can do with just DNS, basically. So I'm here on my shared hosting account, but this works the same on any domain of one's own account. Say, I've got taylor.stateu.org. I'm on jaden.me over here. But keep in mind that you can always make a lot of things happen with just DNS. So if say you have someone that wants to use a service like GitHub Pages, and they want to map a domain to it because they're using something like Jekyll or something like that, GitHub Pages has documentation on mapping a custom domain, and they could easily follow this guide and use the DNS tools available in cPanel to hook up maybe a subdomain or something to GitHub Pages. You can also do a lot of real simple things with subdomains. So I use subdomains all the time in fact, I've got probably too many, to just do redirects. So maybe you've got a need to link to like a special conference site. Let's say this one. So we're on watch.reclaimed.tech/D001-fall22. Maybe you've got like a really long, like a super long URL, and you would use something like Bitly, but you want to make a nicer looking link that you have more control over. Maybe I want to make domains.jaden.me go to that site. I can go into cPanel, go to subdomains, hit create, wait for it to do the DNS and Apache magic in the background. And then once that's created, I can actually go in here and set up a redirect right from here. So it says not redirected. I can go to manage redirection, paste in my link, and now domains.jaden.me should go to our watch site. And there we go.
Inception.
Yeah. So I think, I don't know. I think that maybe that's underappreciated how easy that is. I think a lot of people don't even know that that's an option, but it is a thing. I've seen folks hook up like all kinds of services via DNS. You can do mail services. You could do other web hosting services if you really want to. But there's all kinds of things you can do. But Jim, do you want to take us into the next generation?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll take a moment and just say there was an article I think you shared, and I shared it in Discord, and it actually is by a site called Tedium, and it talks about the long, really invaluable history of LAMP as a sturdy infrastructure for folks to use. And I think there's a lot there. Even seeing you do the redirects and talk a bit about, it's titled I Love LAMP. And it is a great article if you're interested in that history and, how the stack came together. And just, it's been really the kind of default stack for much of the web for well over 20 years. And for that, it's a very powerful thing, maybe even more. So well worth a read if you're interested. But the thing about LAMP that I've always loved, and you pointed to, is the ability, in particular with cPanel, which is the flavor of LAMP that is branded to give us a GUI interface so we can do stuff like redirects, is domains and DNS. So let's just say you have a domain and you're running it in LAMP, and the application you want to run, and I'm going to actually share my screen. Well, I'm not going to actually share my screen. I'm just going to go and put it behind me. And I don't know, did I already mention my Ant-Man abilities? I probably have, because I like to talk about, there it is.
It's like Ant-Man, but instead of a factor of thousands, it's a factor of like 1 or 2.
Thank you for diminishing my superpower.
You're welcome.
As I diminish myself. This is a good example, and we're talking about the next generation apps like you mentioned. This is Reclaim Hosting's monthly newsletter. driven brilliantly by Pilot. And this is a collection of all the work we've done and announcements, etc. And this is running in an application called Ghost. Now, Ghost, if we do a lot of, and Tim, the co-founder and my partner, actually figured out a way to get it run in cPanel, but it was so hard that it was kind of, unless you were a programmer, it was next to impossible.
And
whereas,
it was difficult to maintain over time too, for
terrible.
folks to update and stuff like that.
So you could pull a Rube Goldberg and get some of these apps running in LAMP, but at the point of supporting this for a community, it became impossible. And Lauren can attest to this as well. When people would come to us and say, can we run Ghost? Can we run Discourse? Can we run Dataset? Can we run, in the applications people would keep coming to us, can we run Shiny apps? And we would be like, no, because it doesn't run in cPanel. No, we would be saying no a lot. And so what we did, and the we is royal because Tim really did, found this service that we use, driven by Gelastic, which is now Virtuoso, which is actually basically an alternative stack that runs not only PHP apps, but runs Ruby apps, Node apps, Go apps. And I don't want to get too much into the kind of app soup, but the idea is these are applications that would have dependencies that would not work in a LAMP environment. And Ghost is one of them. And it actually runs brilliantly on Reclaim Cloud, even to the point where Taylor built a really elegant one-click installer. So it's almost like having an Installatron-like access to these next generation apps. And we firmly believe that this will be the kind of future of allowing these open source, because they're often open source, not only apps that can run not in just PHP LAMP environments, but in a whole host of environments, Java, Ruby, as I said, Node, etc. So we're super excited about that. Ghost is one example. And this is kind of, I know it's going to be, but this is kind of what the dashboard looks like. If you're more interested in containers and Reclaim Cloud, Taylor drove a really great understanding containers session that we have video recordings of. That is really a great overview of what this means and how to run it. I run not only stuff like Ghost, Dataset, which is a small app that data analysts love, but also one of, I think, Taylor and I's favorite tool. It's kind of a YouTube clone, and it's called PeerTube. And it's an open source video management tool that allows you to upload videos. And it's a one-click install in Reclaim Cloud. It runs on a fairly complicated stack that you could never run in LAMP in a million years.
And it would be terrible performance if it was.
Exactly.
It would either be slow itself or slow everything else on the server down.
So it's tools like PeerTube, it's tools like Ghost, these what we'll call next generation apps, although they've been around for a while now, that make stuff beyond the LAMP exciting. But the DNS piece that you pointed to, and I will redirect it back to you, Taylor, because I know you have stuff to share, is crucial, because you can still have cPanel app and more efficiently run PHP apps. But at the point where you want to run, videos.jimgroom.com or whatever your domain is, you can actually point that DNS to an instance, whether it's on Reclaim Cloud, DigitalOcean, or some other app-based hosting provider. It really does change the way in which you think about cPanel, not only as a place to host your apps, but also as a place to route to the apps that you're running in a variety of places. So I do love not only DNS and the ability there, but the idea of being able to say yes to folks when they come to us and say, can we run this? Can we run that? And unless it's on a Windows server, like you said, we don't say no that much anymore, which is it's quite nice.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to think about in terms of we've said like next generation hosting and stuff like that, and I think that's not a perfect metaphor in the term of and we talk a lot about this, I think, at Reclaim, and we sometimes get the question from folks of like, well, like I see Reclaim Cloud can do all of these things, and of course it can host a LAMP stack. In fact, if you're like if you're a domain of one's own school, there's like a decent chance that your domain of one's own is hosted in our own cloud,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But I don't think it's fair to think of this as a replacement, right?
No,
Because I
agreed.
personally would not bet against LAMP for a lot of different reasons in terms of longevity, because I think this is really a complement, like you said. Like it allows us not to say no. It allows us to do it allows us to run these applications where a developer said, no, I don't want to do this in PHP, or it wouldn't be easy to do or possible, or it needs more resources than are possible in the LAMP stack. But that the flip side of that is important for things that don't need a lot of server resources or could benefit from being on a server that's hosting many different things. You can't really beat the efficiency and commodity angle of a LAMP environment. Like we can host, like say your domain of one's own server is provisioned for 500 accounts. Say you had that full at 500 accounts. The odds are that's thousands of websites, right? On one server, one large server, right? But one server. That's super efficient. I don't think the need or want to do things like that is going away, possibly ever. The containers have a lot of benefits and allow us to run all kinds of applications, but they do require, just inherently by the way they work, they require more resources. So there is an
Yeah,
efficiency aspect that I think is going to keep LAMP around for possibly longer than you or I will ever care about. you know
it's
um,
true. And I think one of the things there that's worth mentioning is a lot of times it is niche. Like there are niche research tools, there are niche, needs that whether it's a digital humanist or a data analyst or whatever, they need this one thing. And the thing about Reclaim Cloud and the next generation sandbox, if we call it that, is a lot of times it's not always on like a LAMP stack. You
totally.
can use it and cost 20 cents to do what you need it to do and then turn it off. And in that way, it has a very different on and off utility like feel. Like you turn on the heat when you need it, turn it off, and that's all you pay for. So I'm interested in that piece. I just think it's interesting to say lamp and, right? Rather than
Exactly.
lamp or.
One thing I want to kind of show quick here is, okay, well, that's, conceptually we've kind of talked about why, and a little bit of how, but I want to mention, like, well, what does that actually look like? Say I've deployed PeerTube. How do I map my domain to it? And what does that actually look like? So here I've got one set up already that's a PeerTube instance. And I'll kind of show that. Depending on time wise here, I'm going to try another one here as an example. So I'm going to get a Ghost installer ready to go, and so we can do this live here.
You
But
just want to show off your slick Ghost installer.
but I am going to potentially be racing against the clock here. So we're going to do this kind of
Right,
two
let's
different
do it.
ways at once.
Ready? Go.
So I'm going to make a Ghost installer, or sorry, Ghost environment. We'll call it Taylor Test Domains 101. And we'll give it that environment. So that'll be the URL of it. I'll give it the same display name just because. Let's put it in, I don't know, put it in the UK. Why not? So I'm going to let that install and do its thing. But in the meantime, let's look at like my PeerTube here. I have a PeerTube install at video.jaden.me. And so there it is. Jaden.me is my main domain name. And so it's really nice that I can put this totally different application in a subdomain off of another application. Jaden.me, this site is hosted from cPanel, and video.jaden.me running in reclaim.cloud. And to point out, not only is it a subdomain, I can also, of course, link to it, right? So I have a link on my main site to it as well, just to kind of drive that point home of how these things can interoperate in a way that a person visiting doesn't need to know or care where things are hosted. So to make that video.jaden.me, I just grabbed, after I had the site ready to go, like ready to use, I found its public IP address in the Reclaim Cloud interface. This is a little bit small, but and I copied it. I went to my DNS zone editor in cPanel. I added a record. I'm not actually going to do this because it already has an A record, but video test.jaden.me, let's say, and then I pasted the address in and I hit add an A record. You can also just go to manage here and actually show you this A record as it exists right now. So there it is. And if I ever say needed to make some changes or clone this environment in my video.jaden.me and I got a different IP address, I could actually just update the IP address and it would in place make that change in DNS. So that's what that actually looks like. But there's a lot of permutations of this that are slightly different. So another good example here is perhaps rollforcheese.com. So this is a domain I registered actually on Cloudflare to use for a D&D group that I'm a part of. And we're running a application in Reclaim Cloud to power our weekly tabletop. Basically, it's a digital tabletop. This one's not handled in cPanel at all in that particular case because I registered that domain elsewhere. And I pointed an A record in Cloudflare in that case. That's a totally separate one. My point being, you don't have to have your domain in Reclaim to point a domain in Reclaim Hosting's shared service or cPanel or anything to use Reclaim Cloud. You could do something totally separate. In this case, I don't even own that domain. Somebody else owns it. And I just help them set up the record for it. And while Ghost is finishing up its install over here, I've also got a radio station. So this one, radio.jaden.me, if you load it, has this site and then my player embedded. In this particular case, I don't even have the DNS mapped. This is actually just an iframe. So radio.jaden.me is Azuracast that's hosted over here. It has the URL radio.ca.reclaim.cloud. And I simply have a subdomain made that through the subdomains feature, but I'll show it off here in the file manager. That actually is just pulling in the little player web page via a iframe. And actually blogged this whole setup too, if you're curious. But my point being, that web page, while it looks like it's Azuracast, isn't even. And it's actually a cPanel hosted thing. So there are basically unlimited permutations of this stuff. So my point being, if you're looking to mix and match this stuff and you're not sure how, that's when you reach out and we can help you figure out what would be the smartest or easiest or best or whatever way that you're looking for. The kind of interesting thing with this, the reason I did this Azuracast install this way is this means I can actually turn off my own radio station, save some money, and if you go visit my webpage, it still exists, but just gives you a message that the station is down. So it'll say stream's currently offline. So all of those permutations, like Jim was saying, you can turn things off and change a DNS record or point things. All those options are options. So let's check out if we have any time left. We have a little bit. This is my Ghost site that I just created. So it's just a basic blank site. I'll just go in and set up the account on it just to give it a title. So test site, that's my name. Do my email address in there. Set a password. I'm actually really never going to even log in, so I don't care what that password is. Great. So the site is set up. Let me just go back to the home page. But you'll notice that it is actually at taylortest.domains101.uk.reclaim.cloud. Maybe I want to map this to a new domain, and I call it, I don't know, myghostsite.jaden.me. I want to use my main domain. Okay, so all I need is I need that IP address first. So I'm going to get that from Reclaim Cloud. I'm going to go in my cPanel, go to the DNS zone editor. I'm going to add a record under my jaden.me domain that I have here. Well, what did I say? Taylor. Well, we'll do taylorghost.jaden.me. Paste in that record. And so now DNS is set up to go there. However, we do need to let Ghost know to expect connections, basically, because out of the box, if it gets traffic from like a place it doesn't expect, kind of, basically when your browser goes there, it's going to say, hey, I'm looking for taylorghost.jaden.me, and Ghost is going to go, I don't know that person or that, and it'll deny the traffic. So we now just need to tell Ghost to expect traffic from there. So we'll go to the add-ons menu in Reclaim Cloud. And this is specifically for our Ghost and a couple other installers. Sometimes you have to look into the documentation of the particular app you're running to see how it wants you to make these types of changes. This is one of those advantages of LAMP, right? Is you can do a lot of this stuff in a standard way, but when you have developers using almost any programming stack, then these settings are done in different ways.
Yeah.
So for Ghost, we have a domain configuration tab. I'll do the change there. Now we just need to tell it the domain that I just set up, which I have already forgotten. I have taylorghost.jaden.me is the one I just set up. You can see I have a couple out of these. And then apply it.
You might get in right under the bell. You might make it.
Will be even better if it works.
Ooh, it will.
I'll try to visit it. Oh, it's updating right now.
After these messages.
It's going to take a second because it's probably issuing certificates and things like that. Sometimes this takes a little bit.
Yeah. The Nginx, if you do install Ghost.
There we go.
There it is. Yeah. Nice.
So I was a little bit impatient with reloading it. You should wait at least 10 seconds before trying to load it. But yeah, so, showing that, first of all, I think DNS can be scary when you're new to it, but doesn't have to be. And if you have questions, just ask. We can help you figure out that stuff before you make those changes. But it lets you do really powerful things in mixing and matching your tools, where they're hosted, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny because you brought up Cloudflare and DNS, and I hadn't thought about it before this session, but there's something like when you go to, we'll call it the next generation, like Sandbox, where you're using stuff beyond LAMP, given LAMP has become the standard. One of the things you start to realize is one of the trickiest piece of that is knowing how to point your domain or a subdomain of your domain to that app. And once that connection is made, you could use a tool like Cloudflare or DNS Manager in cPanel to manage a whole fleet of different apps in, different spaces, with the DNS really being the glue that integrates it. And it's simply just a link, right? So
yeah,
in some ways it goes back to the link nature of the web. Totally.
It absolutely does. And that's the thing that is like, once you realize that potential, you realize that there's a reason why DNS is complicated, is because it needs to offer those use cases. Those are important, right? Like we have some schools that have domain of one's own that are on a subdomain of their main edu, right? Like I used like for example, UNF has domains.unf.edu. If the DNS system didn't work the way it did, they wouldn't be able to set up domain of one's own as a subdomain like that. Other schools have a custom domain that, maybe that, like, for instance, SNC has night.domains, and that's where the domain of one's own is. That flexibility enables people to make those choices in whatever way makes sense for them or their project or their institution or whatever. It is a little bit complicated, DNS, but ask those questions. We can help. And I'll say, once you do this once or twice, it doesn't seem as complicated. I think the main thing I always got me when I first started making DNS changes is the caching thing, knowing that when you make a change, that your browser and your computer and your network and your ISP even hang on to what it thinks the state is, and for a time that you can't always control. So sometimes when you make a change, you have to wait for it to go through properly, depending on how you did it. That's the only thing that can be a little bit nerve-wracking.
And
But
it's a good piece of literacy too, DNS.
for sure.
Whether it's cPanel or LampStack or beyond, like DNS does remain a consistent piece to understand. So as you're trying to support, whether it's faculty, students, and staff, one of the things to kind of think about and maybe dig into a little bit is how does DNS work and how can it work for you? So super cool. Maybe this is not about lampshades at all. Maybe it's all about DNS in the end.
Yeah, there's an article.
Different shades of lamp, 50 shades of lamp.
Oh no. I'll have to link if I can find it in the article and I'll put it in Discord if I can find it. But there's a how does DNS work kind of thing, and it's really just it's like a network of computers asking each other effectively, but it's a hierarchy.
Are you there? Are you there?
Yeah. Do you know about this? And I'll go, nah. I'll ask Billy Bob if they know. And it goes down the line until somebody knows, and then that's why the caching works the way it does. And once you kind of see that, at least once I saw that visually laid out, I was like, yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert at this, but I do understand why sometimes I can load something. And the perfect example is, say you're about to map a ghost site like I just did. Let's say I was like, I should go do ghost.jaden.me. And you'll notice, as you may have noticed as I was setting up, I actually already had that one set up before. If I would have modified that one, it's very likely that when I visited it, it wouldn't have worked immediately, because we probably would have had to wait half an hour, maybe even 2 hours for an existing record to be changed. And the same thing can happen for new records in certain cases if someone's tried to visit them before. So it can be a little bit tricky, but that's what our support is for. We can help you kind of navigate that, and it's powerful. So
totally
cool,
awesome. Well, it was great to step out of LAMP for a second and look beyond.
Yes. Yeah, like I said, we should have made some kind of Bed Bath and Beyond, maybe.
But I don't have enough
Apache. Time. Yeah, we don't have enough time. Yeah. All right. That's Beyond Domains, No Lampshade. And that's the end of day 2, and that's the end of Domains 101. So really thankful to have everyone who is able to participate. Maybe you're watching this later. If you have questions, post them in the Discord channel. We'll still be hanging out there. Or you can post them anywhere in our Discord or our support forums, all kinds of things we can help you with, all kinds of places to get help. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh, the bell. We hit the bell.
There we go. It's not a workshop without one.
Awesome. Thanks,
so
Taylor.
We'll see everybody later. It's been real. Thank you all.